Good morning. We'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today, Protected by Smartphones, How App-Based Technology Can Improve Worker Safety. My name is Travis Coleman. I'm an account executive here at Aware360, and today I'm really excited to provide you with some insights based on my learnings from working with safety professionals like you. If we happen to meet at CSSE in Niagara earlier this month, I want to give a special thank you to you for coming to see me then and joining us again today. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar will run for approximately 40 minutes. All participants have been placed on mute for the duration of the session. If you have any questions, you can type questions in the question section of your screen. We'll have time at the end of the session to answer as many questions as time allows. Any questions that aren't answered today will be documented, and answers to all questions will be sent out by email this week. I'm being joined today by two safety professionals well-versed in successful implementation of safety technology, Jackie Anishko and Clark Lemieux. We're excited both Jackie and Clark could join us to speak to their personal experiences today. Today we'll talk about changes in safety, changes in technology, and how instituting a people-focused safety program that is driven by technology can help you to reduce incidents and increase the effectiveness of emergency response in the case of serious events while on the job and also away from work. Jackie, would you like to take a minute to introduce yourself to our participants?
Sure, thank you, Travis. I really appreciate you having me here to participate. I've been a safety professional for just about 15 years, and I've worked for both large and small organizations. And the one thing that never changes is that working alone is an activity that increases the risk to our employees. So I'm happy to be here to talk about this important topic.
Thanks, Jackie. Also taking time out of his day-to-day to join us is Clark Lemieux from Crescent Point Energy. Clark, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself to our participants?
Thanks, Travis. I've been with Crescent Point since 2009. Initially, I came on as a battery operator, and in 2014 moved into the role of a health and safety advisor. My experience with lone worker solutions ranges from being a lone worker using our previous call-in method, and then being on the health and safety team researching potential solutions, and eventually working through implementation, and now I'm a user of the 24-hour monitoring system.
Thanks, Clark. I really appreciate both you taking time out of your day to join us. Technology is changing the world we work in. Work environments are evolving, people are traveling further and working remotely more frequently. Now bear with me for a moment as I'm going to throw a bunch of stats at you just to set the stage. A Forbes article recently revealed earlier this year the number of virtual employees rose by 115% in the last decade. The number of lone workers in North America is roughly 1 out of every 5. The number of mobile phone users in the world is expected to reach 4.68 billion in 2019. In North America, more than 70% of the population uses smartphones. And most of us know smartphone use at work is becoming the norm. The type of culture presents new challenges for companies, but also it presents a lot of new opportunities. The companies who succeed in the future will be the ones who realize those opportunities. Today, we're going to talk a lot about technology, but the real reason we're here today is not technology, it's people.
You know what? You're absolutely right, Travis. What we really care about is the people, and that's why we're here today. There's enormous costs to an organization if they overlook the people. I'm assuming that the majority of our listeners here are safety professionals, and even those that are not know that the company's most valuable resource is their people. Keeping your people safe is of the utmost importance and something that cannot be taken for granted. Ever since the introduction of Bill C-45 in Canada, also known as the Westray Bill, both companies and their leadership can be held criminally liable if the proper duty of care is not taken to ensure the safety of their employees. But honestly, that's not why we're here, and that's not why we do what we do. At the end of the day, we want to ensure that our workforce is going to make it home safely every day. So the historical stats are truly alarming. As you said, you know, we're 1 in 5 is a lone worker, but what you can also see is on this page is the workplace injuries and fatalities are increasing still, and that's alarming. So since we're here to talk about people, let's talk about the invisible costs of an accident. The impact of an accident goes far beyond the cost that you can see. I'm sure every person on this call knows someone whose life has been impacted by an accident, whether during work hours or not. They can be life-changing. It can affect you or your loved ones. And it can be the inability to participate in the things that you once did, whether it's going to a sporting event or running a marathon, or, you know, in the worst case scenario, it's that husband or wife who now struggles because they no longer have their partner. Accidents definitely change lives. And we as employers need to do everything we can to protect our people.
Well said, Jackie. I know that every company wants its workers to be safe. The challenge is in how to do that. I think both Jackie and Clark can speak to the main things that keep employers up at night. Jackie, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
So part of the requirement for an organization is to conduct a risk analysis of their job tasks. This helps them understand those that have critical hazards. And if those it's those critical hazards and the fear that maybe we're not doing enough to protect our people, that maybe we've just been lucky so far. That's what keeps employers up at night.
Clark, do you have anything you can add there?
Yeah, along with Jackie is exactly right. In my experience, they're asking themselves questions like, have we done enough to protect our people? Are there new solutions available? Is our program working? These are the kinds of things I think that they're asking themselves at night.
Yeah, both of you mentioned things that I hear from people daily that I work with. At the end of the day, the responsibility to reduce and mitigate foreseeable risk for those hazards is something we hear a lot in regards to legislation. Jackie, could you give us some insights and steps that you follow to ensure your colleagues make it home safely?
So as an organization, it's our responsibility for duty of care, not only to identify the hazards, but more importantly, to control them. So we need to take the steps to mitigate those hazards to as low as reasonably practicable. Once you know that once you know what tasks are being completed and which hazards exist, this now gives you a better idea of which workers are at risk. So basically, as you mentioned before, seeing that nearly 20% of our employees in North America are considered lone worker, for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to focus in on those at-risk workers because there's lots of reasons that could make a person at risk. So I'd like to clarify something here. It's not that working alone that is actually the hazard. What working alone does is increase the risk of the employee, risk to the employee, because should something happen to them, the potential consequence to that worker is higher. So that's what actually makes it a higher risk by working alone. So I'm going to spell it out with an example that actually just recently happened to me on a journey out to the field. I had completed my journey management and I had pre-planned my route, but along the way I second-guessed the directions and ended up taking an unplanned route as I headed out to the lease. So it turns out this new route had no cell service, and no, I wasn't distracted driving, but fortunately for me, while I was traversing the back roads of that countryside, nothing happened. But let's look at the what ifs. What if my car had broken down and it was the middle of winter? I could have been stranded with no heat, no cell service, and on a road that was barely ever traveled, and nobody knew that I was there. So in that scenario, it wasn't actually the working alone that was the hazard, but because I was alone with no means of communication, the potential severity of that incident could have been much higher. And so that's why we need to focus on working alone, because the working alone makes that risk much greater. So thankfully in that scenario, I made it safely to the lease and then took a much more populated route on the way home.
Thanks for sharing that example with us, Jackie. Legislation does help us outline what companies must do to keep their lone workers safe, but it doesn't really reveal how to do it. Companies today struggle with manual call schedules, ad hoc check-ins, and what many don't realize is that the simplest, most effective solution is actually right in front of them. The prevalence of devices means that there are simple, cost-effective new ways to keep every worker safe. Smart companies are embracing these solutions. Clark, as an HSE professional, what's been your experience with technology solutions?
Oh, my experience at Crescent Point, we've seen a ton of technological advancements, pardon me, from optimizing wells, pump efficiencies downhole, emergency response programs, submitting reports, sharing files electronically, et cetera, et cetera. But strictly from a lone worker standpoint, we've seen a big change in how we use technology and our smartphones to minimize the risks associated. Before implementing technology, we were using a call-in or answering service. Workers would call in every morning to check in, and at the end of the day, they'd call out or call in again to check out. Pretty straightforward process, but it created tons of challenges. For example, if a lone worker failed to check out at the end of their shift, the answering service would notify the supervisor, let them know person A failed to check out. We didn't know where that person was and what that person was doing. We had no way of contacting them unless we physically got a hold of them on the phone or we went to their location, which we didn't know. So another challenge was relying on cell service. Working in southeast Saskatchewan and southwest Manitoba, rural cell coverage is spotty at best. So this would hinder the ability for the answering service to get in touch with workers and vice versa.
Yeah, Clark, there you mentioned the real-time response center and really leveraging that. I kind of want to talk a little bit more about real-time response centers and the benefits that you've seen, because that seems to be key in implementing the right smartphone solution. You mentioned you've been using some form of call center for years, even before implementing a more automated cell phone solution. But what are the true benefits you see to using a third-party response center rather than in-house resources to manage that?
Well, obviously there were a lot of drawbacks from our previous system. The benefits, besides eliminating the cell phone coverage, we now have GPS devices which work in no cell phone coverage or little to no coverage. So definitely helping our employees in that regard. We now have a third-party team of experts in their job that are performing and able to handle our large number of lone workers. We have several hundred throughout Canada, so it's a pretty big task for an in-house system. We now have much more data available to us in the event one of our people miss a check-in. We know their exact location, their last check-in time, and this is something we didn't have before. And also Aware 360 and SafetyLink, we're able to tailor the Working Alone app and the monitoring service to our needs. That was a huge benefit in helping us protect our people.
Thanks, Clark. Yeah, no, you nailed it on the head there. Next, I really kind of want to jump into implementing a technology solution. Both Jackie and Clark have been extremely successful in doing this. So Jackie, for you, what's been your experience before and after implementing a technology solution, and what's the biggest benefit you've noticed?
So I definitely think that Clark really nailed the key factors there. I've seen all the same issues he had, where really, as most organizations rely on kind of administrative safety controls for their working alone solutions. So those are people to people typically. And as we all know, people make mistakes. And so you've really increased your room for error when you're relying on people. Just reiterating what Clark already said, but people can get distracted. They can forget to check in. Sometimes I've actually seen where the person that is like the so-called call center doesn't even know who's on shift and who should be calling in. So then how do you even know when someone doesn't check in because you were never given that information? And then you've got just also the whole factor of people not responding to their phones and time zones, exactly what Clark said. So I think that's kind of the before state, whereas then once you've implemented technology, you've moved to more of an engineering control. And so now you've got a technology that monitors and automates, has that GPS, and so it just eliminates a lot of that room for human error. So the biggest thing I've noticed is a lot less false alarms. So I guess one of the other things when you're looking at implementing not just a technology solution, but the next piece was really about how do you go about implementing any new piece? So the biggest thing I think when you're building trust is you need to build the trust in your workforce if you're going to actually implement a new solution. So this is, my opinion. There's some research that does advocate for that as well, but I really believe transparency is key. You need to tell workers why you're implementing something and explain exactly how it works and how that data is going to be used. And then you need to follow through accordingly. So that one is very, very key. So it's really just being transparent and communicating effectively. And then how you use that data is so important. You need to use it to help and to mitigate risk. and to change operational elements that might be kind of that root cause. You should not be using it to punish or to kind of not so much spy on, but using it to look at data that is beyond the scope of just the lone worker piece.
Yeah, absolutely. We hear the big brother and monitoring becoming an issue across a lot of companies. Clark, do you have anything to add as far as what Crescent Point did to encourage their employees to get on the system and get past the fact that it was a monitoring solution for your employees?
Yeah, absolutely. We saw some of the exact same problems here. From an executive standpoint, they know that there was room for improvement and there were solutions out there, so they were behind it 100%, and they've been a big driving force behind this program. Field staff were a bit hesitant at first, and they saw the remote monitoring as a big brother type scenario. So during our rollout, it was important that we just reiterate this is a working alone tool. It's not going to be used for performance measurement. When you're not logged on to the Working Alone app, you're not being tracked by the monitoring center. Once they saw the benefits and people had some time to interact with the app, they quickly got on board with the new system.
Yeah, and really, like you both said, transparency is really key there. Another really big thing that we use to help roll our solution out to different companies is by not only using it for work, but also outside of work as an added benefit to employees to make sure they're safe, not only on the job, but away from the job as well. Clark and I have talked a lot in the past about how we both use the solution during our free time as well. I use it a lot during the winters here in Alberta when I go snowboarding and hiking, whether it be at a resort or backcountry. And during the summers, anytime I go on a long drive, I go camping, hiking, I feel a lot more secure knowing that there's somebody out there looking after me. And if anything were to go wrong, that I'd be able to get help when I need it. Clark, do you mind sharing with our participants kind of Crescent Point's policy when it comes to using the solution after hours and maybe your own personal experience with that as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Travis. So all of our employees are encouraged to use the Working Alone app away from work anytime that they feel it might reduce risk. Similar to what you've said, how you use it, I use it when I go skidooing. And I've also started to use it when my volunteer fire department is dispatched. And you can see on the screen here, it came in very handy for one of our employees. She was on vacation with her boyfriend out in BC, and while driving, they were caught in a mudslide. Swept them right off the road and down the side of a mountain. Both passengers in the vehicle were significantly injured and needed medical attention. Fortunately, she was logged on to the app, and using the app, they were able to notify her supervisor, and that's just one press of a button. So notified her supervisor they were in distress, and supervisor then notified appropriate emergency response teams knowing, her exact location. So along with Good Samaritans who stopped to help the couple get back up to the roadway, the Working Alone app right there, it helped save their lives by greatly reducing the response times of emergency personnel.
Thanks for sharing that, Clark. Here at Aware 360, we're happy to hear that they're doing better now, and that that our solution really does make a difference, both not only at work but also away from it, and that can go a long way into successfully implementing a monitoring solution for companies. I just want to thank Jackie and Clark again for their time and sharing their experience in this space. Before we get into some questions, I just kind of wanted to mention a little bit about Aware 360. And early on at Aware 360, we recognized that technology was evolving, and that change was happening faster than we ever expected. Co-founded by a former helicopter pilot who believes two-way communication and accurate positioning in real time is critical in crisis situations. Well, we have been working in tech since the early 90s and developing products for over 25 years. In the early years, we were focused on assets, machines, and bent metal, for a lack of a better term. However, over the last decade, we have moved our focus to become more people and people safety centric. We understand that people are the most important part of any workplace. Our goal is to connect people using the technology they already have on them and provide the tools they need to have help whenever and wherever it is needed. Providing key information like location, activity, condition, and time, we can help ensure emergencies are managed as efficiently as possible. I really hope that we've been able to give you some food for thought today, and want to thank you for your attention. We'll now try and get through as many questions as possible. Looks like we've got a decent amount of time to get through most of the questions that came in throughout the webinar. The first question we have here, I think, is well suited for both Jackie and Clark, and that's when selecting a safety solution, how do I sell this to my boss? Jackie, do you want to start?
Sure. I think we've all run into this problem, or not so much problem, but struggle or challenge in any organization with any change you want to implement. So in my mind, the big thing is you need to create that cost benefit analysis. So you've got to show that you have a problem. So what is the value proposition? What are you trying to actually solve? And then what's the cost benefit? And that's as we talked about, that a lot of the costs to safety are not are kind of underlying and not that tangible. So it's selling the big full picture of all the different costs, the risks. Definitely taking a risk-based approach will help.
Clark?
Yeah, I guess one of our struggles was that there's so many different options. There's 100 solutions for this problem, and we were fortunate that Aware360 was able to tailor their program and SafetyLink as well, just make some modifications that really worked for us in Southeast Saskatchewan, especially. With the nature of the work that we do, it's not going to be just, one solution fixes all. We tried several different apps, different call-in centers, different web-based technology, and for us, after the trial period of over 6 months, just trialing everything we could, we found that, the accessibility, the ability to work in low cell coverage situations, such as the satellite devices, that was huge for us because that was a very big problem. So it was the ability for Aware360 to be flexible and meet our needs that I think really drove home the need for this.
Thanks, Clark. That actually goes along with the next question that came in, and that's how does the alert function if there is no cellular service? And so there's a couple different ways we can go about that. The first is if you know that you're going to be out of cellular coverage, the best thing to do is have a backup in place. So we've integrated with a number of different satellite devices that'll allow you to send an alert no matter where you are. With both Spot and InReach devices, they both got their strengths and weaknesses, but they'll allow you to set off a signal no matter where you are in the world, even if you don't have cell coverage. One of the other benefits of our solution is the way that it sends the message. So even if you're on your cell phone and you have limited cell coverage and it's hard to place that call, a lot of the times you're still able to get off the alert from within the app that'll go to the real-time response center. So it is slightly more reliable than your typical cell phone call to a 911 service. And at the same time, it provides that location. And that's really key in managing an emergency response situation as effectively as possible. The next question we have here is how do I get my people and my workers on board with this solution? And we've talked about this quite a bit throughout the webinar, but it is a key thing. So I don't think it's wrong to rehash some of the things we discussed before. So Jackie, do you want to get into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll definitely reiterate the need for just open and clear communication that brings about that transparency. People need to see that your best interest is about the people and kind of help them understand how you're actually looking out for them and helping to prevent any severe injuries happening from them, and so that you can help respond in a faster manner.
Clark?
Yeah, once again, I mean, it's really about clear, honest communication. The workforce has to realize that there is a problem and that we're looking for a solution. If they don't see a problem, then they're probably not going to be open to a solution.
Yeah, exactly. The next question is relatively simple and I can answer pretty quickly. And somebody asked, does this work on all phones? And the answer is essentially yes. Any newer smartphone device running Android or iOS, the solution will work on their phones. So makes it very easy to roll it out throughout a company. As we mentioned early on in the webinar, the prevalence of smartphones is ever increasing, making it ever easier for companies to implement a solution that using something that people already have on them. Next question is, what happens when people are off duty, and are they being tracked, and how do you deal with the privacy of employees? Clark touched on this a little bit earlier, but the quick answer is that when an employee signs off, they're no longer being tracked and their location is not known. At the same time, if somebody enters their app and sets off an SOS, their location will be sent at that point. Clark, do you want to touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So exactly like you said, during regular business hours, while people are at work, while they're responding to alarms after hours, if they're signed on to that app, then we know where their whereabouts is. In case of an emergency, we have a quick response. If they're off work and signed off that app, there's no tracking happening. So it really was a working alone app, and that's something that'll come up if you're going to try and roll this out. There's a program like this, is people are going to be worried about the big brother aspect. I was able to show them with my own phone and on the monitoring system. I was signed on. We could see where I was. We pulled up my location. I was in Carlisle. I signed off. We looked on the map and I was gone. So some people need that visual confirmation, but it's strictly if you're not signed on to the app, you're not being tracked.
That's such a clever idea, Clark. I really like that.
Yeah. The next question that came in is how long it typically takes to get up and running with a technology safety solution like SafetyAware. Implementation is pretty simple, as we've mentioned a few times throughout. Users can download the app, they receive a password, pretty easy to set and get on board. The interface is very simple, self-explanatory once people begin using it. To me, once a company has buy-in from top down, it comes down to training, follow-up, and making sure employees begin using the solution and ensuring their safety.
Yeah, when we implemented that one, Travis, I found, the initial implementation of anything takes a long time, because you really have to think about what do we want our emergency response plan to actually be. So often our ERPs are kind of fluffy, and it just says, call this person, but it made you actually sit down and say, okay, for each device and each region, what do we want the response to be there? So I liked that you could differentiate and have different response plans depending on, location and site. But then what I did find was once we had done that groundwork at the beginning, then it was so easy. You get a new phone or you get a new location, and it was really, really easy to then just quickly get that set up with the monitoring company and with Aware.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually touched on that, Jackie, because a big thing to consider as part of the policy is exactly that, coming up with the escalation procedure. And each event is going to want to be managed in a different way. A missed check-in is going to be handled a lot differently than a missed hazard check-in or a SOS. So things like that are definitely a big part of implementing a solution. But become a big part of your overall safety policy. The next question was, I think, brought in before about remote areas in foreign countries and globally. That goes along with anywhere there's cell phone coverage, a cell phone solution will work. If you're going to areas without cell coverage, satellite devices can definitely fill those gaps.
You know what I liked about that? Because we do have those remote workers and kind of going in and out of cell coverage. Well, I loved that they can either say, hey, I'm going into the hazard mode, and they could say, I'm going to be gone for half an hour. And then if they didn't check in that half hour when they're supposed to be back in range, then it would start triggering it. So I liked that it was, you know, as you went to more of an engineering versus a people focused, it wasn't just that dedicated 2-hour check-in. Well, what if someone went down at 1 minute into the 2 hours and now they're 2 hours they're missing? So I really like that hazard mode and just being cognizant of when they will and will not have service.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up too, Jackie. You know, it also makes it easy to switch from device to device. So if you're on a cell phone and you lose service, as long as your inReach device or satellite device is on, it'll automatically switch you over to that and you can start checking on it. You're the same dot on the map, which makes it really easy for people who are driving in and out of cell phone coverage in these remote areas. The next question that came up was, what was the #1 concern you had when implementing a technology solution? Jackie, do you want to start here?
Well, I think we've beat this one kind of to death here, but my #1 thing is cell service. And, you know, that's the nature of the business. Well, a lot of businesses. I've had a couple of different companies where we were very remote or in and out of service. So that's definitely a #1 concern, is figuring out how do you make that work. A couple other things are looking at the personal devices versus the work phones. Not everyone has a work phone. And so looking at the solution you have and does it meet those needs? I think about a lot of the GPS vehicles, and people driving their personal vehicles would no longer have GPS because we only put them in our fleet vehicles. So that's definitely with technology another thing. And then it always comes down to, you know, cost. Can we make it cost effective, and is that cost relevant to the associated risk?
That's good. So we've got a question here that says, does Titan and Crescent Point provide phones to employees, or do employees use their personal phone? I have apprehension from employees that we are now asking them to put work apps on their personal phones, and which the company doesn't pay for. Do you provide extra money to workers to purchase insurance on their personal phones if the personal phones are dropped or broken, splashed on with chemicals, things like that? I'll start by saying, you know, at least from the data usage aspect of it, it's very minimal. So again, this goes to rolling it out properly and making sure people know that it's for their safety. So even if they are using their personal phones, using, you know, what equates to about 20 megabytes of data per month is very minimal. That's about a 2-minute YouTube video. But Clark, do you want to speak to what you do as far as providing devices to your employees?
Yeah, absolutely. And that great question, because that was another hurdle that we had during rollout. A lot of people said, well, it's just going to use up my battery life. It's really cold in Saskatchewan sometimes, and the batteries are at a premium. So there's a way that you can actually pull up, you know, which apps are using more of your battery life, and it'll show you exactly that. So we were able to get past the battery life question pretty easily. As far as the devices, Crescent Point issues all of our employees an iPhone, so it's pretty easy for us to know that everyone is using the same technology. So for that reason, it worked very well for us, having everyone on the exact same page.
And I can speak kind of generically to that question, where from what I've seen at various organizations is you tend to have kind of not a collaborative, an approach that varies because different people have different preferences. So you see it a lot with a bring your own device program at different companies, where you get X amount of money paid to use your own device instead of a work phone. or you can get a work phone. So I've definitely seen different companies all have different solutions, and it really depends, in my opinion, on the preference of the employees and the nature of the work and just kind of company policy. I don't think there's a right or wrong, as long as people understand what they're getting at and that you look at it to be fair.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, both of you nailed that on the head there. One of the other things that I think we might have overlooked here is a specific part of our platform that we're also really proud of, and Clark kind of alluded to this as far as getting everybody on the same platform. And using our wide network of real-time response centers, one of the big benefits we've seen is with workers in remote areas, often it's 40 minutes to over an hour and a half before emergency response can get there at times. And by having people on the same platform, they've got insight to other companies. And we've got a program called Neighbor Helping Neighbor that allows companies to opt in to provide assistance to other companies, individuals out in the field. And so if it's going to be an hour and a half before help can arrive, they can contact somebody in another company that might be within a kilometer, 2 kilometers, to go provide assistance until actual emergency response can get there. So just another added benefit to having a solution that's widely used, especially in Western Canada and globally as we move forward. I think that's about all the time we have for today, but I hope that we're able to provide some food for thought. And again, thank you for your attention. If there are any additional questions that we missed, we'll make sure to get to them throughout the week and respond to those in a timely manner. So thanks again, Jackie and Clark, for joining us today. And if you have any questions or want us to do a lone worker risk assessment, please ask us to do so, and we'll reach out to you here in the near future. Thanks a lot.